This is Lota Cheek Davis Sanders, also known as Lota Cheek. She was a model, actress in several plays in New York during the early 1920s. As you can see from her picture, she's quite a lovely woman, and she gets a little bit of buzz these days, and everybody wants to know what happened to her. Well, Lada had an uncle who was the mayor of Dothan, Alabama, and she had a cousin who was her uncle's nephew, her uncle being her mother's brother. And that's where she retired, and she became a school teacher after several years of being in New York and being a famous fashion model and an actress in numerous plays and some films, which I have not seen. Lada married initially a guy named Tyrell Davis, who you'll see a photo of in just a few seconds. Tyrell Davis was a famous comedic actor during that time. Unfortunately, this led to scandal, as Tyrell Davis was actually married when he married her, and it became a big tabloid and newspaper scandal, which I guess deeply scarred Lada, and she continued to work under her next married name, Lota Sanders, as an actress, but eventually she kind of retired from film, and she ended up back in Dothan, Alabama, which is very close to where she was raised in Georgia and where her mother was from. And then she became a music teacher and apparently died in California, according to her great nephew, Jay Cheek, who I met and who is my cousin as well. But that brings us back to me. Me and Lada are both Cheeks, and Lada and I are descended from a long line of Cheeks that goes back many generations to about 1209, when we first achieved the name De Cheek and Hole. And my Cheek family lived in North Georgia with hers. We're all descendants of the same person, who you will see his gravestone of later, William Martin Cheek. William Martin had several wives, 3, and he had about 13 children. Lada and I are descended from 2 of his children by his second wife, Priscilla Ann Sartain. Now, this is his grandson holding the children, and that is my great-great-grandfather, Preston Van Diver I. He would be the grandson of William Martin. Probably this family and Lada's family would have known each other. So these are all of my dad's brothers, sisters, some of the children. This is my father, Ralph. And then we all fairly recently found out our family genealogy because other people had updated it. And I never knew, nor would Lada have known, that we're descended from a lot of noble families in Europe, or that our Cheek ancestry goes back to the de Boot-Villain family, which goes back to the time of Rollo and his brother-in-law, Bernard the Dane, which is where our family inadvertently comes from. If you look back at heraldry would say that we're descended from him, but I'm descended from a Robert de Cheek and Hole in 1209 in Shropshire, England, as is Lada. And then their descendants became famous during the time of Henry VIII and afterwards. I know. It's pretty surprising to me. I'm not sure it would be surprising to Lada to know where she got her drive from. But the Cheek family married very prominently. Many of the women in the family married into noble circles and are ancestors of the Queen of England, Lady Diana, myself, lots of Americans. This picture is of Penelope Devereux. Penelope Devereux was an ancestor of one of my female lines. She was the daughter of, or the granddaughter of Mary Boleyn, who was Anne Boleyn's sister. Now you can see the beauty of the women in this family. This is Sir John Cheek, his wife, Mary Hill. Mary Hill married after John Cheek died again and had numerous children, but she had 3 children who were raised by Lord Burleigh, who was her brother-in-law. He was her brother-in-law because he had married John Cheek's sister. And their family, the Cecil family, through the senior line, are descended from the Cheek family. This is a painting of John Cheek. He was a redhead. He was the provost of Oxford College. He was also the tutor of Elizabeth I, but predominantly her brother, Edward. And he was also a friend of Hans Holbein, and this is a drawing of Hans Holbein that I think is John Cheek based upon all the other images I've seen of him, although it isn't signed off as being him. I think that it does look like the other images, which you'll be seeing. But what I was saying was John Cheek's descendants married quite prominently. His sisters, his aunts, several people in every line married back into nobility because of their connection to Lord Burleigh, who was married to a Cheek woman, and the Cecil line being descended from them, and that power allowed the Cheeks to marry up. So in the next image that you're going to see, you will see an image of two women called the Cheek sisters, who are my ancestor Anthony's sisters, and they were both duchesses. Anthony came to America, and he became a colonist, and we're all descended from him. But these women, I think, both are ancestors of the Queen. One or two, the other of them are ancestors, Lady Diana, Sarah Ferguson, the princes, Prince Charles, all of that family. One more image of John Cheek to compare to the other images. But the Cheek women were very beautiful. They were very intelligent. They were poets, writers, women of society that were emulated, just as Lota was. And Lota, or Lada, which her family says her name was actually Lota, but it's pretty funny, was descended from this family. So here you have Frances Radcliffe, who was married to one of my Cheek ancestors. These are different family crests, and you'll eventually see the Cheek family coat of arms. But this is the family that she came from. So oddly enough, just like me, we were raised on, from farmer families. And not necessarily extraordinarily prominent, but we come from this gene pool and this long line of rather famous British, nobles. So as you can see, you got Frances Radcliffe, Lady Penelope Devereux again, Robert Rich, who was Frances Radcliffe's brother. And that all brings us ultimately back down to our common ancestor, which was William Martin Cheek. And William Martin Cheek's two sons by Priscilla Ann Sartain were Rowan, my ancestor, and Burgess Holland, who is Loda's ancestor. So we're fairly close cousins. Bringing us all the way down to relatively present age, to Loda's timeline and my timeline 100 years from hers, almost. She was quite lovely, quite famous, quite an amazing woman. She inspired a book by her cousin, which is studied in universities to this day. She has a body of work, and when she's seen on the internet, people are stunned by her transcendent beauty and how she seems to step out of time and look at you across the ages as a thoroughly modern woman. One thing I can say for her is she seems like she found happiness, and she did have a career, and she was still an artist and an inspiration to lots of people throughout the rest of her life. I'm still checking into where she died and who her Sanders husband was, because I have Sanders on my dad's mother's side. I have a feeling that being that she was ultimately from North Georgia, that's how she met her Sanders husband. Though it could be through a different line. But that's Lada, Cheek, Davis, Sanders, brief genealogy. The other interesting thing is there are other branches of Cheeks, and I work in Dunwoody. I live in Atlanta and Tucker. And in Dunwoody, there's a Cheek Sproul House, which is a famous landmark. And that branch of the Cheeks are ancestors of two people I went to college with who I felt were Cheeks. And when I finally got the genealogy and had access to it and learned more, I found out that this person here that lived right here was their ancestor and also descended from William Martin Cheek. Thank you for watching. This is Lauren Cheek from Laurencopia.